well, what does safety mean to Viva Energy? And be quite honest, what does it mean to me? And I'll start with at Viva Energy, safety is our core value. And you might hear a lot of organizations or a lot of people will say, you know, safety is our #1 priority. I actually take a little bit of exception to that because I think priorities change, right? They can change in our personal lives and our business lives, but core values never do. The other thing as well is a fundamental belief in that all incidents are preventable. And I purposely choose the word incidents and not accidents. Accidents are like acts of God. I walk out there and I get struck by lightning, right? But we do believe that by the way that we design and operate and maintain our facilities, that we can design out incidents, and then through the way that we train, how we hire, train, and work with our people, that we absolutely can prevent incidents. So what I'd like to do now is I'll turn it over to Rob. He's our project manager on the gas terminal, and he's got content that he'll take you through this evening as well.
So look, I think what we'll do is we'll just give a couple of minutes to go through the scope of the project. I know a few people here already know about it. There's some familiar faces, but there's some people here who I haven't met before. So I think it's worth just taking some time to talk about the scope. So really there's 4 major pieces of scope to us, and you can see on the diagram up here, this is the new project overlaid on our existing refinery. And here's the floating gas terminal, so that will be permanently moored at a new jetty extension that we're going to construct at the refinery. And then this second vessel here is an LNG carrier. And tonight, what we're talking about safety, and this is what we've heard from community previously, it's really going to focus around these 2 ships facilities. One being the gas terminal and the other one being the transportation of LNG. So that's one key scope. The second one is the pier extension. Then we've got a pipeline that connects from the gas terminal, runs along the new pier extension, across the existing pier, all the way, traverses across our refinery, up here where we've got some treatment facilities where we inject nitrogen and odorant so that we can smell gas. We're all familiar with that smell. And then an underground pipeline from there for about 4 kilometres out to Lara, where it ties into the Victorian transmission system. And for those who aren't familiar, as you come into Geelong at Hovels Creek, you go down around the bend on the left. If you look up to your left, you can see a fence, and that's where the tie-in location is, up there. So, what is LNG? It's essentially just natural gas that's cooled down. So gas is hard to transport in its vapour phase, but if you cool it down to about minus 160 degrees as a liquid, then you can transport it in large quantities, which is what this project's about. And then how hazardous is LNG? Well, when it's at a liquid, it's not hazardous, and that's why it's cooled to that level. It's not toxic or corrosive, and it's not stored under pressure, so it'll come in on these vessels at minus 160 degrees, and essentially ambient pressure. Okay, so let's talk about LNG shipping. LNG shipping's been around for, I'd say 60 years, quite a long time, over 100,000 journeys around the world. And I think a couple of key things that we need to bear in mind and understand is the design of these vessels. So they're essentially a double hull. So they've got tanks within the hull of the vessel, and between the hull and the tank is really thick insulation. So that's the only way you can carry this around at minus 160 degrees, is to insulate it. And then the ships are really modern, the ships that we're looking at bringing in, and we're out talking to companies about this. They're all built less than 10 years ago, and they come with modern safety equipment. So there's detection, fire and gas detection, there's shutdown systems, there's firefighting equipment on board, and then there's the new high-tech navigational aids and the rest that they come with. So they're a very modern vessel as well. And the other thing, when they come into Corio Bay, they'll be escorted by tugboats. The speed's really low. I think it's about 5 knots as they come into the bay. And we're working with Ports Victoria around all of this as well. Unloading takes around 24 to 36 hours. And we're looking at between 15 and 40 ships per year. Yeah, so our plan is to send the seawater, which is cooled, from the gas terminal into our refinery, which will then warm it up and then discharge it under our existing EPA licence. So it would go back into the bay slightly warmer than the bay, but slightly less than what it's going into the bay at the moment. This project is, one of the pillars for it is that Victoria is a large user of natural gas, and our natural gas supplies are starting to drop off. And the forecast is that Victoria is going to be a user and a large user of natural gas for a period of time. So we've talked about a lot of these already, the safety features. It is highly regulated, as Dale touched upon. There's a refinery that's highly regulated. This floating gas terminal, it will be highly regulated by the same regulators. And really, we need to, at this stage of the project, we're undertaking some risk assessments, and detailed risk assessments are a key part of design development and project development. And I'll talk a little bit about the risk assessment process in a little bit. All right, so risk assessment. And this is where it becomes scientific and mathematical. So it's not up to me or you or somebody else to do it, but there's a process that you undertake. And there's professionals out there who are risk and safety engineers, and they're the ones who we entrust to do this work. And it's accepted by industry, governments, regulators. It's used for planning purposes. And you use computer models that are built up over years with historical data to assess the risk. And how is risk calculated? There's two parts to risk. There's the consequence of what happens, and then there's the likelihood. And you put those together and you get the risk. So the way I try to explain this sometimes is if you've got an airplane flying in the air and it landed on the Geelong West Town Hall, the consequence would be catastrophic. Right? It'd be hundreds of lives would be lost. But the likelihood of that happening is so minute that none of us even worry about that, right? So that's the consequence and the likelihood coming together for a low risk. So we've got to talk about both things. And that's what a quantitative risk assessment is, or a QRA. It's a tool often used within major hazard facilities like ours, and it allows us to assess that risk. And what it does is it can present you with a number, essentially, or some contours of risk at various distances from the hazard, which in this case is an LNG carrier or the gas terminal. And then a little bit more about risk assessments, and I think this is really important because what is the process? And really, you've got to identify the hazard, and we've talked about a few here tonight. Then you've got to understand the frequency, the likelihood and the consequence. Again, we've touched upon that. And then that gives you a risk calculation. And that's it over here. And then you need to ask yourself, well, is that tolerable or not? And then what is tolerable? So, and then if it's not tolerable, well then you go back here and say, well, we've got to reduce the risk. And then that might be, certainly in our case, where we're at in the design phase of the project, well, what other design modifications can we make which will mean that we lower the risk and get it down to a tolerable point? So there's this loop here that you undertake and that we undertake. So they're a really powerful tool so that you don't just go and design something and think that it'll be okay. You go through the rigorous process, get a technical scientific number as a basis, assess it, and then take any action that you require. So these are some of the hazards we've considered: onboard incidents, severe weather events, loss of containment from either the floating terminal, the LNG ship, or on our pier, collision from port traffic or the LNG ship into the floating gas terminal, and an incident while at berth with the floating gas terminal operating. So we talked about the modelling and it giving you contours and giving you an answer and a basis. So this is what the contour map for the operation at the gas terminal with an LNG-C and operation. And the question about what is a tolerable risk, these contours give you the risk, and the risk reduces as the further you go away from the facility. So the orange line here, the most concentric, is that's industrial. That's the benchmark for industrial. So, and then the light blue or aqua, depending on how your eyes are, is the contour for planning purposes, outside of which you would build a hospital or a school or a childcare centre. And you can see that here it's just impinging on the edge of our refinery, but the general public isn't impacted. We move on to the transport, and the preliminary QRA finding is that the risk level is negligible. There's no contours registered. So there's no impact to community or residential areas. And that's driven by that time where the transport is happening. So 20 to 40 times per year at a number of minutes as it goes up here. And the fact that it's low pressure LNG. Those two things are different to being at the location at the refinery, and that, therefore the risk is less. Yeah, so this slide really talks about the next steps, and it talks about the additional QRAs to be done, including the interaction with our refinery and vice versa as well. So we're not at the beginning, but we've only done a little bit, and there's a lot more to come in terms of risk assessments and safety assessments for this project. And we're happy to share those results as we continue. So whether that's in another couple of months or 3 months or 4 months or however longer it is. Security, Dale. I think we've talked about this. I did want to mention it, and I think we've covered security in a fair bit of detail so far. But we've done some work to understand whether our existing processes and controls that we've got in place are appropriate to include this project, and they are. Okay, so tonight is one part of community engagement and receiving feedback. And as we go through the EES studies, there's other opportunities, and we've had the scoping document open for comment, and that's recently been finalised. And then there's also when the EES is submitted. But we'll continue to engage with the public. We have events like this every month. This month it's about safety. Next month, Joe, what are we talking about? Amenity. And the month after. So we'll continue to have more of these formal engagements, but then we're also doing informal stuff. We're out at shopping centres and the like. And if you've got specific questions and queries, by all means, drop us an email. Go on our website. There's lots of information on there that's getting updated pretty regularly. And we're more than happy to answer any of your questions.